Hello and welcome. Today I'm excited to be with my good friend and host of the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, Stephen Gray. My name is Marc Caron, and today we're excited to speak with Cosmic Sister Rachael Carlavale. She was one of our past presenters at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in 2019. Rachael is a permaculture farmer, yoga instructor, mindfulness educator, cannabis activist, and cultivator, and is working toward an eco-conscious revolution through her Ganjasana cannabis plant medicine yoga. The Ganjasana Cannabis Yoga School is a 100-hour yoga teacher training that brings knowledge of plant medicines through yoga and mindfulness to the world. Rachael sees herself as a conduit for awakening messages from the natural world and a steward of the medicine. And she roots her practices in the ethics of permaculture, earth care, people care, and fair share. Welcome to the program today, Rachael. It's great to see you and have you on board today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to connect with you both today.
Hey, it's just always a pleasure. And I love, following up and, keeping in contact as we move forward in these new times is, how do we keep the conference and our work alive without doing live events and things of that nature? And, one of those ways is for us to, keep sharing people's work and the message of plant medicines for healing, transformation, and whatever that might be for the healing that people do need. And of course, my sidekick, Stephen Gray, well, he's like my Bruce Wayne to my Dick Ward. That's Batman, Stephen. But it's, Stephen himself is so well versed in cannabis and spirituality. So I just thought it'd be a great opportunity to have this conversation of, kind of what's happening in the world, what we're seeing in your work with cannabis. I understand you're now in Maine from Colorado, what's happening down there. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about yourself for those people who don't know you, how you got into what you're doing and where you're going with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I'm so honored to be here connecting with you both today. And a lot of my work really started on the scientific side of things in university, studying plant medicine on the level of looking at plant and soil sciences, looking at how we can incorporate permaculture and ancient farming practices into our healing modalities, which of course led me to connect with Cosmic Sister and Medicine Hunter to really bridge that connection from understanding plant spirit through academia to understanding plant spirit through the spirit and actually working with the plants and having those hands-on experiences. And so a lot of what my mission on this planet is to empower people to be able to use these tools like yoga and meditation and mindfulness practices so that we can all access the wisdom that the natural world has. There's so much wisdom embodied in the plant kingdom and the rock kingdom and every part of this planet that makes up this cosmic universe. And we're constantly being bombarded with threats to our nervous system, everything from the technology that we use today to artificial lighting to different calendars and rhythms that get us off our own natural circadian rhythm. So it's really looking at how we can revive all of these tools that our ancestors have been using for thousands of years, everything from the plants themselves to practices like our breath. Our breath is so powerful. And when we really sit and take the time to work with these practices, then we can, so to speak, get our messages and downloads and connection with these plant spirits so that we can ultimately live in balance and live in harmony with this ecosystem, with this divine nature of life.
Nicely put. Yeah. So I'm sure Mark and I both have a number of questions we could ask you. Perhaps one ganja and yoga, Ganjasana. They're some people might say they're two completely different things. Why have you put them together?
It's interesting. Some people may say that, and I have heard that as well. And then also we can look into the ancient Vedic texts and everything from what yoga stems from, Ayurveda, which means the science of life. And when we look into these texts and these stories, what we see is that the plants, the humans, our ancestors, and working with these plants were given the wisdom of what yoga is, of how to hold your body or how to breathe or how to still the mind, was inspired by the plants themselves. And so in my intention of combining the cannabis and yoga, and we don't just work with cannabis, working with all sorts of other plants as well. We've done rose plant medicine ceremonies, and it's really, you can connect with any plant in nature using these practices and find great benefit. But a lot of it is really, again, those revival of those practices. And so in the ceremonies that we hold, it's first attuning ourselves. So first using a mindfulness meditation and using our breath awareness, pranayama, to, on a scientific level, bring our body into a balanced state. So if we look at our autonomic nervous system, that might look like transferring from the sympathetic, our fight or flight mode, into parasympathetic. So we're using these to calm us, to bring us into a centered, balanced state, so that when we can introduce the plant medicine, it's building that relationship. It's seeing the plant as a sentient being, that we can speak to them and they can speak to us. But it takes a lot of work to get to the level to come to that space of clear communication. Just like any relationship, if we meet a new friend or a new lover, it takes time to get to know each other, to bring ourselves into a, if you're familiar with NVC, is nonviolent communication. So where we can speak from the heart and speak from a place of peace, and also be able to receive the messages back so that we can really listen.
Nice.
Yeah, and with the ceremonies too, I always find it appropriate to mention that I encourage people to come sober or not working with other plants. And a lot of shamans or people who work with plants will require a special diet, or dieta, as you're familiar with. And so any type of plant or again, relationship, you can think of it as like a monogamous relationship. So if we're going to sit and commune with cannabis, we might want to have a dedication to that, where it's a commitment to one another to build this trust so that we can open up and ultimately unlock all those answers that we're seeking, that are really just deep within us that we forgot.
When I do my cannabis ceremonies, I encourage people to lay off cannabis or take a what some people call a cannabis fast for
Yeah.
maybe ideally at least 3 days and perhaps longer. The Santo Daime people that I know that are cannabis friendly, they'll take anywhere from 5 days to 3 weeks of a cannabis fast before they do a cannabis ceremony or include cannabis occasionally with their daime, their ayahuasca. But I don't. My personal experience is that cannabis people are you're not exactly the most obedient people around. They're sort of anti-authoritarians. They're used to being outlaws for a long time, and
Absolutely. Well, I always say the plants are the teacher, but in being a guide, it's sort of the role to be a leader in which we can command the space. Because in holding ceremonies in person, I had a lot of instances where people would show up with their dab rig and their vape pens and all sorts of things that they're used to using, where we're bringing in a new way of working with a plant, a new way of understanding this intimate relationship with deep respect and regard. So in those instances, I do take the commitment to the plant to let people know beforehand and during, because sometimes they would still bring it that, oh, thank you so much, you can keep that, you can put that away, because I would always provide the plant medicine. It was really important to me that we're all on the same page during ceremony. And so we may all have our own unique and different experiences, but in working with a particular plant, it's nice to have that one specific genetic cultivar that you are creating and you are, working the space and working the medicine with. And so as we translate into a virtual reality these days, here we are in 2021, and we're able to connect online and see each other and create these experiences. So how do we create that intimate experience working with a plant medicine through this virtual reality? One of the things that we've come up with is, and I don't know if I had mentioned this to you yet, Stephen, I think I spoke with you a little bit, Mark, but about providing the plant medicine. So at least in the US here, with our hemp farm, we have the hemp bill that passed in 2019. And so all of hemp is legal. And by definition here, it's anything below that 0.3% THC. And so in working with hemp, it is one and of the same plant as cannabis. We just call it different names because of legalities, but from a scientific level, it's all cannabis sativa L. So it doesn't matter, the percentage of THC in the plant when we're particularly working with it, because there's so many different cannabinoids and we're learning more about them. There's hundreds and hundreds every day. I know CBD has been very popular, and CBG I've started to see on the market. And so we're going to be providing the CBD hemp flower for people if they so choose. And so they can come on to the internet and purchase it and have it mailed to them, so they can have that flower available for them to participate in an online ceremony.
So you're saying that CBD with essentially without THC can do the amplification job that, so to speak, that you're hoping to bring people into in these ceremonies?
Well, there's still those small trace amounts of THC, but I think
Hmm.
in working with the plant, in and of itself, it's of course going to be a different experience than if you have a high THC cannabis plant versus a low THC CBD plant. But there's many benefits, and people even say CBD is not psychoactive. That's how we classify it currently. But if it elevates your mood, relieves depression, relieves anxiety, it prevents the release of cortisol, which is our stress hormone, that is all, to me, psychoactive. It's changing your environment. And
Hmm.
so it is, of course, a bit subtler in our experience, but for every person, it's very different. I've worked with people who had a hit of a CBD joint and they felt high. And it all, again, has to do with our body, our unique makeup, our tolerance,
Hmm.
how much cannabis we do use, understanding what THC percentage, how that might affect you.
Well, and this is why I think it's so important. And I had a great value for, the cannabis fast. Stephen
Mm-hmm.
would always kind of tease me because when it came down to sharing at the end, my common line would be, I'm always surprised at how so little can take me so far. And
Right.
that's with the fast, you raise your tolerance if you're a regular cannabis user. um, your tolerance gets raised so much that it just doesn't have that same effect that I've found.
Oh
And
yeah.
I can say for myself, the one thing as I got into the plant medicine world after being a cannabis guy for most of my life, um, ayahuasca showed me, because one of the things I looked at was I got to give this up. It's time for this to change. It's something that got to change in my life, and that was one of my intentions when I went in. And she just showed me to respect the plant, to change my relationship with it. And this is something I think what you were talking about, Stephen, is, the rebels who just keep smoking anyways, and they'll already have smoked their joint before they even come to a ceremony. So what I found in my experience is it completely changes the experience of the
Oh yeah.
ceremony if you don't fast,
Oh yeah.
right?
We
And
had
if
one
you
guy,
do.
yeah, one of the ones over at your place, Mark. We had a guy there that obviously had not made any effort to ease up on his heavy smoking, and he smoked like 7 or 8 times as much as everybody else in that circle,
Mhm.
and then he fell asleep. Like two-thirds of the way in. He's lying down, everyone else is sitting up, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I want to inquire a bit more with you, Rachel, about this CBD kind
Well,
of
and
approach. I find
CBG, you mentioned
oh,
CBG. I'm curious what that is.
So
CBG.
CBG is cannabigerol, and so it's
Oh,
another cannabinoid within the plant. So we
Uh-huh.
have CBC, there's THCA, there's Delta 9 CBD, Delta 9
Mm.
THC. So, and there's hundreds and hundreds, and we're learning about more every day now that we can really research the plant. But all of the hemp that we're working with is grown through the permaculture methods that are so important to me. And I know a lot of the people that work in the plant spirit community, because when we work with the plants, what we're really working with is the soil in which they came from. The
Mm.
quality of the spirit of the plant, I really feel, is reflected in the quality of the land in which cultivated the plant. And we can see this too through looking on a molecular level. You can look at, what vitamins or minerals are present in a plant grown in a soil devoid of those versus a soil with a rich ecosystem that has polycultures, many different species of plants growing together, devoid of pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, anything of that nature, any type of toxins that may end up in your final end product. So it's always very important for anyone in any type of plant medicine that they're working with to not just understand the people in which they're working with, but understand the actual plants, the source of them, how were they
Mhm.
farmed, did they come from, especially as we work with all types of other plants, and ceremony like ayahuasca, as you mentioned, is a huge concern, I know, for a lot of people, is really knowing, who brewed this and what's in it. They use lots of
Mhm.
different plants sometimes, or different flower essence that they may work with. And so having a connection with the soil, with the land itself, I find is very important. And that's what we really try to translate within these ceremonies, and something that I'm looking at seeing how to translate online as well. Because a lot of times, often, we may bring in the soil for us to hold during meditation. The microbiology activates the marma points on our hands, and we have our own microbiome. And scientifically, it was published in, I think it was Family Circle magazine. It was said, parents, it's safe to let your kids get dirty because it actually releases serotonin in the brain and it increases our immune system. And, it's really a positive thing to inoculate your immune system with the soils of the earth. We're always trying to sanitize and get rid of, but it actually brings more health and vitality to have diversity.
Yeah, dirt. Use dirt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's going to make such a difference to the plant. Like if you take
oh,
something hydroponic, grown indoors under artificial light with all of these things, to an actual plant in nature, planted into the earth, cared for with intention and all of those things. Like I love what you were talking about, of being able to hold the dirt and connect with that,
Mm-hmm.
and especially if that's the dirt that grew the plant and the medicine that you're working with. And, there's so many great opportunities that just ups the level of the energetic connection and the healing properties of the plant versus something grown for profit under a light with you know fake nutrients that are all chemically
mhm.
created, right? and
Yeah,
and,
it's
and for
interesting
me
you,
it
you
just makes
say that.
sense. It just makes sense. If whenever we go back to nature, and man is always trying to speed things up, make it better, profit, business, all of those things. And I think, even the quality of our food, if we talk about plant medicine, the food that we eat is medicine as well, and they're plants. It's a
Mm-hmm.
whole different thing if you're out there growing it yourself in your own garden or on your balcony, whatever, to buying it in a grocery store that's just industrial pesticides, all of those things. Just becomes a very, very different thing.
What I'd be curious about, Rachel, and maybe this has been done, but although obviously the scientific method can't answer everything, like the meaning of life or whatever, but gold standard studies can be very helpful. Double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized studies. I wonder if anyone's actually done that, like to take, uh, like a plant grown the way you've talked about, grown and loved and cared for, right from beginning to end process, and then something that's grown, in cannabis growth, 4,000 square foot, factory,
Yeah,
with.
I think a lot of people are looking at the way in which they're measuring it is looking at the terpenes and the cannabinoids that the plant can produce. And
Right.
so right now what I've seen is comparing plant by plant, looking at the amount of terpenes, what terpenes are present, and what cannabinoids are present in what amounts. And that's all done in a lab using chromatography and different systems like that. And then I've also, as you know, our friends Kelly and Josh with Dragonfly Earth Medicine, we've worked with their plant medicine before as well. And so they're a huge proponent of certifying farms in this closed loop process. And so what we're able to do is really have a whole network of farmers who are growing in one particular way that we can compare and contrast and see what the differences are, looking at COA's certificate of analysis. But I'd be interested to even go on a deeper level and really see, how we might be able to measure the spirit, so to speak, or somebody's experience of that plant.
That's what I
I
mean.
know before I launched Ganjasana, when I was working deeply with the ayahuasca plant and with the Shipibo tribe, I was also an educator. I was doing curriculum development. And so in education, what I learned is that for it to be evidence-based, you have to have your measurable, a pre and a post measurable to show change over linear time, to show that this curriculum, this education is working or not working or causing harm. And so we were measuring children's, youth and adults' skills, attitudes, and behaviors. So I took all of those models and I applied them to my Ganjasana classes. And what I was looking at was people's skills, attitudes, and behaviors before the ceremony and after. And so what I had them fill out their own on a Likert scale, from 1 to 10, how are you feeling? But also what I did was look at different genetic cultivars, different ways, modes of consumption, looking at the size of the class, the type of the type of the class that we did. So I spent about a full year sort of researching what works for people, because I knew what worked for me, but I know we all have our own unique and different experiences. And so it was very neat to be able to see that, there are collective experiences where, you might have what you see as a specific breed or genetic that creates an elevated mood for everybody, or a specific genetic that created everyone to feel sleepy afterwards, or, really, really being able to tap into people's unique experiences through research. So I'm a huge proponent of making data-driven decisions and really, looking at the science, but then also not getting too caught up in the science. Because as you know, like, how do you measure that? How do you measure someone's experience, or how do you measure your spirit? And those are great questions to ponder.
Well, for example, in comparing, say, as I mentioned before, the two different ways, if they're, you took like one of extreme, the perfectly, grown and loved plant versus the sort of impersonal factory plant, and then applied it to the same group of people in the same circumstances, enough times or 2 or 3 times of each different one, and then ask them to report on their experience. You can get some good trends that way,
That would be really cool. So I never did that with, a factory grown versus permaculture grown plant. And in that terms, there is a cool book called What a Plant Knows, where they've done a lot of different experiments there, but also, I don't remember the experiment, but they have played like music to different plants, hard rock or Metallica or something, and then calming music, or had people yell angry words at plants, and even all the way down to the molecule of water. I was reading this morning all about the consciousness of water and how it holds our codes. And so, when we're watering plants, that goes into their codes. And so we can go down this whole rabbit hole of thinking how everything is intrinsically connected.
Absolutely.
So does hard rock kill plants?
I think they didn't love like the abrasive music.
Like the
Right.
thrash stuff, right?
Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
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 So when you're actually able to bring people in the physical space with you, do you have a particular preferred kind of cultivar like strength of THC, different, terpenoid mix, et cetera, that you think is ideal for people? And if so, could you tell us what that is?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's like one cultivar ideal for everybody, but I have found specific genetics that are great for different experiences. And so, if you are looking to have a really what I would call a heady experience where, and this is how myself, I don't know how other people classify their experiences, but I find with cannabis, I'm either finding a couple different ways. I'm either finding myself going into my head and maybe getting really creative thoughts and ideas and downloads with a specific genetic cultivar. And one that I loved for that was called Headband. And actually, the name came from the experience. And so that one came out from California, which they crossed with a Big Sur Holy, which is from a 1988 hash plant. And so they called that the Holy Headband. And so that particular cultivar I just found was so great for really kind of working through our headiness down back into the heart. And then if we're thinking about really embodied a body experience for me, that was more of like a deep kush type of variety where through my own personal healing journey I had a lot of physical pain, and so I was always looking for something that could relieve pain from the body. And so myrcene is one of the terpenes that is known to relieve pain. And so any type of cultivar that you find, because with these cultivars, they've been so polyhybridized out, and then people rename them and rename them and rename them. And I feel like you never really truly know what it is unless you do see the certificate of analysis to see like what is in this plant that I've been sold. Um, and so being able to identify what's in it, I found that myrcene was great for the pain relief. Any types of plants with limonene in them, which is also found in lemons. So if you think about a lemon, what type of experience do we have when we work with a limonene? It's very enlivening and brightening, and maybe that's like a morning ceremony or sunrise, like a lemon super haze. So it really depends on what somebody's looking for. What are your intentions in working with the plant? And that's why I find it so important to encourage people to use these practices like meditation, because who stops to sit and meditate and think about all of the sun rays, the agni that the plant photosynthesized to create the flower that we're going to imbibe with, and give great thanks to be on this planet, to be able to work with this plant. And so it just allows us the space to cultivate that gratitude. And that's where I find, a lot of our healing takes place in that gratitude sense of the relationship.
In your experience, do you think there's a particular combination of cannabinoids and terpenoids that would be ideal or the best balance between being uplifted and awake, but not too much in your head? Because if you're like I'm thinking about meditation in particular, because that's sort of my main focus is, you don't want to be spending a lot of time in your head, because we, arguably spend way too much time in our heads anyway,
Mm-hmm.
especially in these so-called Western cultures. But you don't want to be getting too dozy, so is there some kind of balance or ideal combo in there that you found for more clearing the space for deep meditation?
I think I just really find the most important part of understanding each plant was tapping into our intuition of how that made us feel. Because there's a common saying that there's indicas, and those make you feel down, and there's sativas, and those get you up. But that's not necessarily true for everybody, and everyone has their own experience, and we know that the genetics are not that black and white. I know what works for me personally. As I was saying, I loved the high myrcene compounds, and we know through reductionist science that myrcene helps relieve pain. It's anti-inflammatory. We know that CBD in particular prevents the release of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So something high in CBD also would be very nice. But for a specific combination, it's like understanding maybe not being able to feed everybody the same meal, that we need to find what really, works best for us. And so I encourage people to just sit with the plant medicine, and then also after the ceremony experiences, I encourage people to journal and to write about it as well, because when we journal, we really get to tap into those experiences and see what it was like for us and how it felt for us. And then once we do find those particular combinations or particular genetics, then we know what to look for.
Right on. Yeah.
Well, I know, in my experience in cannabis ceremonies, and oddly enough, my first cannabis ceremony was actually after my first Spirit Plant Medicine conference, when I kind of took over in Conscious Living Network. I was just volunteering in 2017. And Selena at the time, as a thank you for the volunteers, had us all over for a cannabis ceremony. So it was to me, it was a whole new concept, and where I was changing my relationship now. And so to me, that was really impactful. And then, so now working with Stephen, we started doing more ceremonies and supporting his work. And I love the way, Stephen always chooses his medicine very, very carefully. And I'll never forget this one experience that we had at our house at one time. And there was a woman sharing, and her comment, and you'll remember this one, Stephen, she goes, "Was that really just only cannabis?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I'm a couple of people next over to share it too, because I'm thinking, I was thinking the same thing, because I had such a psychedelic experience, as did she,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's one of the important things too, when you're talking about everybody sharing, if you're in ceremony, everybody connecting with the same plant, the same genetics, that same strain, so that when you start comparing people's experiences, where and a number of people in this circle had that experience with cannabis, and we're talking 3 or 4 tokes, maybe, not a lot.
I think it is a really psychedelic plant,
Absolutely.
Once you open up to it, it is psychedelic. And it's funny, it reminds me of one of the ceremonies I was holding in my kind of trial error when I was doing the pre and post evaluations. I was testing out edibles, and I did an edible ceremony where I actually made a big batch of pot brownies and had all my friends over, and I said, okay, take your pre-test, and here's your pot brownies. And it was a disaster. It hit, everyone got the high at different times.
Imagine.
Some people had to sleep over. One person was like, I'm tripping out. I'm like, I can't do this, So I was like, okay, that is not the way that we're going to go. Everyone has a different experience with edibles, of course, but.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was one of my questions. Like, when you go into your ceremony, when you're going into yoga, do you find, is it better to smoke, vape, ingest? And I think you kind of answered a good part of that right there.
Because, on a one-on-one level, if you're working with one person for their particular needs, it can be great in terms of ceremony. Or for a person individually, edibles can work wonders, especially if people don't want to smoke. It's great to be able to eat it and have it work on that level. You are losing a bit of the plant profile sometimes through digestion and the process through the liver, for the availability of how much THC or CBD you're getting into your system. I personally feel like 10 times higher if I take 10 milligrams of an edible versus smoke 10 milligrams of cannabis. So for me, I know I'm so sensitive, and with other people too. And so those are all things that I looked at, and especially now with needing to be very extra precautious about germs or distance or things like that, and to adapt. Um, and I think we did this too with our ceremony. We had rolled joints for everybody or for groups of people. And so before, I really do love the act of passing a joint and sharing.
Hmm.
I see, there's lots of culture and history and everything from the peace pipe and seeing cannabis, of how our elders would sit down and commune with the plant before communing with each other, or before making big decisions. And so I do love to be able to share and pass, and smoking the plant for ceremony. That is my favorite way to hold ceremony, where it's a shared experience. But I've
Hmm.
adapted, and we've had, everyone has their own joint that they can smoke on their own. And then for the online ceremonies, we can mail you a CBD joint.
Hmm.
Nice.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
one thing I want to say, Stephen, if I may, before you go ahead with that, it's because it's the one thing I want to say to anybody out there who's watching, who's never participated in anything like a cannabis ceremony or, ganja yoga or anything of that nature. The one thing that was really specific for me that I really realized is, so many people who smoke pot, if we're going to use that phrase, never really take the time to actually sit with it. It's usually a social thing, or they're so outside of themselves as they're, you know, getting high or doing whatever they're doing, however they're using it, that they never actually take that time to sit down and go inside with it. And what I realized is, the power of that plant versus just smoking a joint to get high. And I
Mm-hmm.
encourage anyone who may have any doubts or, think we're talking silly about this, to really, attend one, do something, and experience the plant with a different reverence and a different perception and way of working with it, because it is so powerful than just being, like a pothead on the street smoking pot, because that's what you're doing. I think and it's one thing I wanted to share, because it was something that, I thought I was pretty smart and pretty, cannabis, you know, experience. Yet when I went into a different relationship with it within ceremony and honoring in a very different way, going inside, completely different experience. And when you talk about different cultivars and everything else, it's something most of us never take the time, right, to look at it that way, if that makes any sense.
Well, that's,
Oh
yeah, of
yeah.
course, that's what we're doing here.
Hmm.
Rachel, I'd like to follow up with you, if you don't mind, a little bit on this sort of edible versus inhalation methods, because I agree with you. It can be really, wacky, and stuff like that, and also not often for a lot of people not quite as sharp when you're eating it, as opposed to having a toke where you sort of more or less suddenly burst out into that clear space, ideally. Um, uh, so two things I want to say about that. One is that we sometimes do all day ones, and when I do that,
Mm-hmm.
I give people a small chocolate at the beginning to kind of get things, to so that they're staying in the space a lot longer. And those are 10 milligrams, and for most people, that's just a nice kind of light dosage. No, I haven't had anybody say that that was too much. And then once that's settled in, an hour and a half to 2 hours later, we'll offer a toke or two to kind of take you out into the sort of more airy, ethereal, up kind of space. So that's that. But the other thing I wanted to say and kind of throw back in your direction is. Despite, you say like that sort of disastrous experience you had with your brownies there, historically, um, taking cannabis orally has been a big part of the spiritual literature for these powerful psychedelic experiences, in India where they make drinks out of it and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I
Uh,
was gonna say bong. I've had bong at my ceremonies, but I've had it a CBD bong, just because of my previous research and working with people and working with the public. Um, because when you drink, it's still an edible, something that you're drinking. So just being able to adapt with our current times, and um, if you're having people come to a gathering and then drinking bong and then driving home, maybe disastrous. So I
Right.
love with retreats is the perfect place to give people the sacred space and to hold space for them to go deep, and to work with things like edibles. And I also like it in being a retreat leader where you can control the space because, they ate lunch, they ate a good healthy lunch, they're getting lots of hydration and water, and, they have a safe place to stay. So you feel really good and comfortable about it. Whereas if you just have an event, people show up, you have no idea what their day was like, and then they eat an edible. Maybe they hadn't ate all day, or you don't know what their experience is going to be. So that's why I love in the retreat setting, it gives a chance to build intimate relationships with each other. And so you can really go deep on that level. So I love that concept that you talked about, Stephen, having a little chocolate and then checking in and seeing how you feel. And I always do that anyways in ceremony too, with just smoking, because I've had people come in person to ceremony who had never smoked before,
Mm.
and it was a very brand new experience for them. And I've had people, take one hit of a joint and they are out there. They are in psychedelic land.
Yeah.
We had that experience once, Stephen.
Oh yeah. There was this.
I remember the one specifically downtown.
I know the one you're talking about, and it's an important point actually because, well, when I lead the ceremonies, I always say, if you know yourself to have a kind of a sensitive metabolism, if you're not familiar with cannabis particularly, or if you haven't smoked it for quite a while, please start slow. Like have one modest toke, because and then I always check back with them in 10 minutes because I say, within 5 to 10 minutes, you're going to know. Actually, as you know, Rachel, obviously, the effects are pretty much immediate. However, what
Mhm.
I've started to be more attuned to lately is that even though the sort of what you might call the physiological effect of the plant is more or less immediate when you smoke it, if you sit in silence with it, the sitting in silence will deepen. Even if you didn't have cannabis, you will go, gradually deeper. So it can continue to deepen for 5 or 10 minutes. But after about 10 minutes, you're probably safe to know you're not going to go higher, or you might say deeper than that. And so I'll say start slow. If you're not sure about how high you're going to get and so on, and then in 10 minutes, I'll just check back with you. And if you feel like, oh, well, that was just a very, very light amount, light effect, I'll have another toke or two. But that one Mark's talking about, I said that to that group. You remember, Mark?
Yeah, oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and there was this woman who wasn't familiar with cannabis, and she didn't take it quite seriously enough. I think she had two
Maybe
tokes or
three
something.
tokes. Yeah,
No, I
Mhm.
don't. I don't even think it was that much. It
yeah.
wasn't much, but
No, it wasn't.
she needed caretaking for the next couple of hours. She was
Mhm.
way beyond for her. Yeah.
Well, and it's like we've always said, and everybody has always talked about in our interviews and everything in this plant medicine world. Everybody out there, dose is always low and slow
Yeah.
because you can always take more. And I have seen total cannabis friendly people who are, they've got a tolerance. And an edible will knock them on their butt. Edibles
Mm.
can be very, very, I don't want to say dangerous, um,
Dangerous.
though, though I want to say that they can be very uncomfortable, yeah, uncomfortable, tough experiences for people who don't know. And edibles are, really tricky that way because most people don't know, especially they taste
Mm.
good. It's like candy, you don't know, you know,
And if
and
Mhm.
they're not
it
educated, they don't know how long it takes to come on. And this is like right out of the classic stories. As 45 minutes later, you go, "Oh, I'm not off. Are you? Let's have another one."
exactly.
And your term "dangerous," Mark, isn't completely inappropriate because my family doctor, for example, does not like cannabis, and the reason he doesn't like it is because his only contact with it is people who show up at his clinic or called 911 because they're
Mhm.
freaking out because they overdid it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
And it
and
can definitely be overdone. And it reminds me of what you were saying, Mark, of how a lot of times people smoke all day, but then they don't take the time to sit. And that's the whole mindfulness practice,
mhm.
right? So even with our food, where people are eating and watching TV or eating and reading a book, or you're always doing something, but you never take the time to sit and just eat and like chew each bite and feel it go down. And that's plant medicine too. All the foods that you're eating are plants or animals that ate the plants. And so taking these concepts with the cannabis, and I've had people come to ceremony who say, oh, I smoke all the time for the last 20 years, but they had never sat with the plant. And just to hear them after come out and just, wow, their experiences are so magical, to see the excitement on their face of, wow, I've been smoking for 20 years and I never felt that, or I never tapped into that, or I never like sat with myself. Some people I had one person have like an anxiety attack because they'd never sat with themselves and sat with their thoughts and just be. And that person had called themselves a expert. I always like, if it's a small intimate group too, or if we're going to be working on a deeper level, I'll have conversations with participants before the ceremony, just to kind of check in and see about their understanding of cannabis and their level of expertise. And so, even people who use it all the time, again, maybe they were using a factory, we'll call factory farmed plant medicine, and maybe they had never tried this type of potent plant medicine for them, and to really sit with it and open up their mind to it.
Absolutely. And that's, one of the things, in terms of, and I'm going to say me personally in this conversation and the work that we do, one of my intentions and goals is to help change the perception and the stigma of, people like Stephen's doctor. And, we had a conversation with some people close to me just this past few days about that. Two completely different opinions about working with, and it was interesting. One person was, of a younger generation, one person's of an older generation, and you could just see this difference in this conversation in terms of, the thought process behind it, and, medicine, and, if it's because then it's a drug. So, this is why I love this conversation, because it's to change that perception, that stigma for those people out there as well who just think, weed is grass and it's dope and it's all of those things from the 50s and 60s that we were kind of led to believe, that it's so much more than that.
Well, hopefully we're beyond most of that, hopefully, for most people now.
Well, I'd like to think so, but I know it's still out there.
Yeah.
I know it's out there because I actually experienced it this past couple of days, and had to even kind of intervene a little bit, because we can all have our own beliefs, but it's not to impose them on other people and make them wrong or, bad because they choose this in a conscious way versus not. So that's the thing for me, because that's also freedom. That's about being our sovereign self to make our own decisions based on education and, facts, right?
Yeah. Rachel, I want to see if you have any more thoughts on this notion of anxiety, because I've thought about this a lot. And to me, it's testament to the fact that that plant actually is a psychedelic plant, that it can dissolve ego, or it can shock you, in a sense, out of your, your narrative, your cocoon, your sort of status quo. And I think this is something that people need to understand. I think more people could benefit from understanding that if you experience anxiety with cannabis, it's not a message to never use cannabis. It's a message that that is a powerful spiritual ally plant. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I talk about this a lot, and I actually wrote an article about it. I'll have to send it to both of you about my opinion of anxiety and cannabis. But what I feel and what I've seen, and what Bob Marley said, the plant will reveal yourself to yourself. And the definition of anxiety, we're either stuck in the past or we're stuck in the future, and we're coming back with bad news, and we're not being here in the moment. And so if you're feeling anxiety, that's what's in you, and that's what you need to work through. And so that's why a ceremony is work. I was talking to somebody today about ayahuasca ceremony. They had never tried it, and they, there's a whole perception that it's a magical rainbow experience, and that, I let this person know it's a lot of work. You have to work on yourself, and you're going inwards, and you are the one clearing and cleansing and working with the plant. And so, I mean, that was my experience at least. And so the same thing with cannabis is if we're feeling these anxious feelings, where are they coming from? And the cannabis is letting that reveal to ourselves. So there's a lot of healing I feel that we can receive in working with the plants through our emotions. And so that's what in the Ganjasana school, what we talk about too is not just mindfulness, but social emotional learning. And I like to use the metaphor of a sniper is mindful. They are so mindful. They are there, they have their target, they are ready, they're in the moment, right? But are they being socially and emotionally aware? And so these two components need to come and work together in synchronicity and in union. And so the mindfulness piece is, by definition, paying attention to the present moment without judgment. And then social emotional is our social awareness. So identifying first what you're feeling. So what are the emotions I'm feeling? It's anxiety. And then the second piece of that is managing those emotions. So, okay, I identified I'm feeling anxiety. How can we manage those emotions? I know my breath, my yoga. Okay. And so once we're able to manage our emotions, then we can contribute to society and be aware of all the other people around us. So what I hear a lot sometimes from people who don't use cannabis is it gives me social anxiety, right? Maybe they could use it by themselves, but not in a group. They say, oh, I get really quiet. And it's because we're moving through those levels of emotion of you first maybe are feeling anxiety and you're not in a space to be aware of anybody else because you're working on yourself right now. So that's why I love ceremony, because it gives us that space to work on ourselves.
Exactly. In a safe
Yeah.
place where you don't have to worry about your social anxiety.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, right on.
and I can say I've experienced exactly that. There's sometimes just, from regular stuff where all of a sudden it's like sometimes I think I wish I didn't do that, because I'd lose my social connection in a way, right?
Mhm.
And in that same ceremony, Stephen, we were talking about the one woman who had,
Mhm.
overdone it a little bit.
A lot.
In that
Yeah.
ceremony too, and this is the one things I love about what you do, Stephen, in the ceremony, is you kind of describe to people what they can expect, especially if they're not regular cannabis or experienced cannabis users, kind of that process from, when they start smoking, here's what you can expect to possibly feel. And I remember that specifically as I was sitting there after just a couple of tokes, like I literally, this anxiety came up through me and I was like, what's going on? I hadn't fasted either or anything like that, like you would have wanted me to, but it was really super powerful where that came up and it was kind of sitting through that for me. And it happened. So it's real. And have to say for me, it happens to me. I know other people as well that happens to, but I love what you described with that, Rachel, is to sit with it.
Mhm.
And let me ask you this. If we were to use it for that feeling that we would use anxiety, if we were to use a different word to describe that feeling or what's happening, is there another word we could use to describe that?
Well, I'd say fear. It's the fear of being changed, of seeing, being shown that the little package that you've been putting together since the day you were born, and probably for several lifetimes, if not more, prior to that, is not substantial. This is a basic, core teaching of, traditions like Buddhism, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
the ego is a fiction. It's a collection of stories that we've put together, and it's maintained daily, moment by moment. So we're always afraid of, to one degree or another, depending on the person, of letting go of that. Would you agree, Rachel?
Absolutely. I feel like all of our emotions sort of distill down to either fear or love. And
Mm.
a lot of the processes I was speaking about back to the nervous system, you can call the parasympathetic the love and the sympathetic the fear. And so when we use these practices, like if someone is feeling anxiety or however that's showing up for them, it's moving from the fear to feeling that love of, all
Hmm.
unconditional. We are all one. Truly, the separation is an illusion.
Mhm.
Yeah, nice. Hey, I got a practical question. Do you have time for another question, Mark?
Yeah, we got a little bit more time left, and then we'll start wrapping it up and talking about the stuff Rachel's got coming up in the near future, because I'm excited to experience this Ganjasana.
Yeah, well, maybe
Yeah.
I'll, yeah.
So go
Um,
ahead, Stephen. You
but yeah,
can
I
you
just
can have
wanted,
one more.
this is like a, technical question. I'm just wondering if you're aware of this notion. You're familiar with Daniel McQueen, right? You know Dan McQueen?
Yes, I've heard of him.
Oh, okay. You don't know much about his work. Anyway, he has a book called Psychedelic Cannabis, and in that book, he talks about he has found what he considers to be great success with mixing several, strains, 4 or 5, cultivars all together in the same mix and smoking them that way for with his ceremonies. And obviously, there's a sort of a lack of control there. You don't know all of the terpenes and stuff that get into the mix, but I think his position on that would be that rather than say one terpene that might be like say myrcene, which tends to be the soporific drowsy inducing one, contradicting or counteracting the uplifting terpene, they kind of all add to each other. I don't know. Have you worked with mixing cultivars, in the same joint or whatever much?
Yeah, absolutely. And we call that the entourage effect, seeing how when you have all of those things present, all of the different cannabinoids and the diversity of the cannabinoids and the terpenes, that it increases the medicinal benefits. That's why I'm such a huge proponent of what we call full spectrum plant medicine. So, especially in the CBD industry, the hemp industry, as well as, THC industry versus isolates. And so when you have a full spectrum, you're getting the diversity of the whole plant as nature intended it. And so whatever genetic cultivar you have, perhaps, this one is high in CBG and high in CBD, and then you introduce another cultivar, maybe this one's higher in THC. Now it's like you're creating a synergy. So it's bringing more to the table. But there's positives and benefits to having just working with one particular cultivar or having the whole fruit salad. If you're just eating a Macintosh apple and feeling the presence of that versus having an apple, a whole fruit salad. So we there I love being able to mix it. And the other thing that you were inspiring me to quickly speak about is working with different plant medicines also at the same time, especially in the psychedelic world. I know for me personally with psilocybin, I love working with cannabis and psilocybin together. I find that the cannabis is really grounding and that they complement each other, for me and for a lot of people I've spoke with and worked with. So I find that, diversity is key. That's one of the principles of permaculture is integration over segregation. So yeah, I love that concept.
Well, excuse me, I haven't had the kind of experience you have in mixing those two, but I have had a little bit, and I would also personally caution people to be aware that yes, it can ground the effects of the other one, but it can also potentiate those effects.
Mm-hmm.
So I think probably that I consider cannabis an advanced spiritual ally or medicine in the first place by itself. But I think we're talking really sophisticated or advanced work in a sense when you start combining it with other plants. You really have to know what you're doing. I think you have to for example, in my cannabis and spirituality book, um, uh, 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 Mariano da Silva talks about how sometimes he's an ayahuasca master, and sometimes in their ceremonies they will have some Santa Maria, they call it, after the second round of ayahuasca. And he has this beautiful little statement in the book where he says the ayahuasca takes you to the top of the mountain, and the Santa Maria gives you wings to fly in the wind. So,
Interesting.
it can really take off too. And I've had that experience one time in particular where I just felt like I had a modest, I guess, sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, sort of like a 4 out of 10 kind of level of psilocybin. It was outdoors. I was actually out in a, kind of, I don't know, beautiful nature spot. And then I had a toke
Perfect
or two.
setting.
Yeah, and I had a toke or two, and I just felt it immediately, essentially doubled the effect of the
Mhm.
psilocybin.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
definitely amplify the experience.
Hmm.
yeah,
Maybe
and
that's what I enjoyed about it.
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
for
yeah.
for me, I've had both effects where I've had it amplify the experience,
Uh-huh.
and I've had it actually ground me when
Mm.
the psilocybin's taken me. And this I learned from Terence McKenna. Because when I started learning about psilocybin and mushrooms and medicine, I went to YouTube and started watching everything that he had out there.
Yeah.
And I was listening, and it was funny because he was telling the story of how he does it. And he goes, and in his preparation, he talked about he rolls a bunch of bombers. And I'm like, what? What did he say? And I go back and I listen. He goes, I
Yeah.
roll a bunch of bombers. And he goes, and as he kept going, as he started telling what that he was rolling a bunch of joints so that
Yeah.
he had them so that if he goes way out there, he could use it for grounding. And he does it first ahead of time so they're ready so he doesn't have to fumble around in his
Exactly.
journey to do that. But I thought it was kind of funny because I'm thinking,
Yeah.
here's this guy who's a doctor, rolling the bombers when he was talking about it. I just thought it was kind of funny.
I do the
But
same thing, and you know what's
that's
funny?
where I
It
learned
reminds
that.
me of, and I think Zoe came up with this term, the Alice bag.
The
And
Alice
so
bag.
whenever we were in ceremony in the jungle, we would have our Alice bag prepared, like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so the bag had, so you're not in a space, in a psychedelic space and trying to take care of your personal basic
Needs. Yeah.
human needs.
Yeah.
And so, if you need cannabis, I know a lot of people had work with mapacho, smoking mapacho, the form of tobacco
Mm-hmm.
there. So they would have those all rolled and prepared. We had our breath spray, or a little
Mm-hmm.
blanket, or things that your creature comforts that you need. Get everything ready before you go onto that journey. And she was like, even that one night, I couldn't find the thing in the Alice bag.
Is
But
there
I
any
love it.
indication that having CBD, once you're well into the psilocybin experience, has a particular kind of grounding effect?
I'm not familiar with CBD and psilocybin, but I am familiar that we've seen in research CBD can take away from the THC effect. So if somebody has smoked too much weed, they can take CBD to sort of bring them down. Um, Also, black pepper, I heard, can help bring down the effects. And then I
I've
was
heard
reading
vitamin C
about
and oranges and things like that
yeah,
as
Oranges?
well.
oranges,
Yeah.
vitamin C and oranges. I actually was in a mushroom ceremony last year, and it was served, and like it was the mushrooms had been soaking in an orange and lemon and juice type of concoction. And so we were served like that, but I had never had it with oranges before. So that's where I learned about that.
Wow, interesting. So we're getting kind of towards the end of our time. And I wanted to take the opportunity to, share the work you're doing, Rachel, because you're kind of doing the same thing that Stephen and I have been doing the past year since the world has changed and we're not able to convene and, hold ceremony. We're going online. We're doing a number of things, and you've got some stuff coming up. And I wanted to, make sure that you had time to share that with everybody and invite them to the work you're doing, because there are opportunities to experience this online. And yes, people, we do know it works. Right?
Yeah,
It
I've
really
already
does.
done a
For
few
those who doubt,
online.
it works.
I've done a few online ceremonies, and they work beautifully. So decided to bring them out to the public and share it with everyone. So we have online Ganjasana ceremonies coming up. There's one January 27th. And then we'll be holding those monthly around the full moon. And then a few other workshops where we'll go a little bit deeper. So those ceremonies are about 2 hours. And then we'll have other workshops where we'll focus on other topics as well. And then we have our green tent which is the Women's Cannabis Circle. And so that's also a revival of an ancient tradition of the red tent, if you're familiar with that, where women, it was a menstruation tent. So women would gather together and menstruate under the new moon. And so the green tent is working with our plant spirit ally cannabis. And so those are around every new moon, every single month. So we have one coming up on January 13th. And so that is all going to be focused around aligning our female cycles with the lunar cycles and seeing how we can work with these concepts of plant medicine. Women have been using cannabis for thousands of years for everything from birth to their period, menstruation, to help find balance in their system. So we're really excited about that. And then the other thing we have coming up is our teacher training. So we focus a lot on education and want to be able to have these practices accessible for all people. And so the teacher training is a 100-hour certification. And if you're a yoga teacher, you can also get continuing education credits through Yoga Alliance. And the certification focuses on many different aspects of the plant spirit ceremony, from cultivation, understanding about the soil food web, how to grow a plant, how to propagate, how to harvest it, how to make medicine, to how to hold ceremony, how to hold space, how to be a leader, an educator, and make sure everyone is safe, make sure you're legal and compliant. Compliancy is huge, especially every state has different laws, every country has different laws, every country has different definitions of what is cannabis and what's hemp, so it's a lot of education looking at all aspects of the ceremony, from how to set up your altar space to how to market your own classes. So we're really excited about that, and that's going to be coming up next month. And so we'll be holding a few of those this year.
Sounds great. I'm interested in that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to have you.
Great. Well, and I know Stephen's got some stuff coming up too. We're just always looking into doing more work, and I'd like to encourage people, if you're curious, you want to take your relationship to cannabis with the next level, you want to take a look and see what's kind of going on, because the world is changing and it's becoming, decriminalized. It's legal in many places, and now's the time for those who don't know to, maybe dig a little deeper in terms of, discovering the power of cannabis and how, great of a plant it is, not just medicine, but, hemp's been around since the beginning of time for clothing and sails and ropes and all sorts of things, medicine and food, that it is a powerful, powerful plant that is changing the world. So, Rachel, I want to thank you for your work that you're doing as a pioneer and riding the wave with what's going on and what you're bringing to the people. I thank you so much for that, as well as you, Stephen, for the work that you do with cannabis and spirituality to, again, change perception, to create experiences that really lead to transformation of individuals, that leads to transformation, of the world. And, it starts with us as individuals, I always feel. And, the more work we can do ourselves, the better we can take that out into the world to make a better place for everybody. So I thank you very much for just being you, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. Any final words, Stephen?
Oh, just gratitude, Rachel, for the work you're doing. Very impressive that you got a number of fingers, so to speak, or avenues of this work, and you're doing what seems to me fantastic educational work. And when Mark was just talking about, changing the conversation, and you're very articulate about the way you explain it all as well. You're able to hold a lot of information in your mind and share it in these sort of wonderful little gestalt bubbles of 2 or 3 minutes at a time. They're quite wonderful. So thanks a lot.
Which is a beautiful example that not everybody who uses cannabis is a dope, right? There's a lot of smart, productive people out there changing the world with this medicine.
I really
and
do
that's
not
the one
like that
thing.
word. Yeah,
What's that?
Word, I don't like that word dope.
Either do I. I used it because of the history of it.
I understand.
Right?
Yeah,
That's the only reason why, because I don't like it either.
No.
right? I don't like the word drugs either. I like the word medicine and things of
Yeah.
that nature. And that's where it's about changing the conversation around it. So,
Yeah.
and
All right. So I'm done. Thanks.
all right.
Thanks again.
And Rachel, anytime you have something you want to share, you want to go out and connect with the community and everything else, just reach out. I'm happy to always, have a conversation around the work you're doing at any time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to connect with you both. I know, Stephen, we got to lead a ceremony together at the last conference, so that was really special and just always wonderful to connect with you all. And like you said, change the conversation and keep it going.
Yeah. And that was really sweet doing that with you, by the way.
That was a great ceremony. And we
Yeah.
had another great one online last year in 2020 as we went virtual. It was a little shorter because of our power outage, but nice look on your face there, Stephen. Yeah, it was a great experience. And thank you both for the work that you're doing in regards to this plant and doing what you're doing. So on behalf of me, Conscious Living Network, Spirit Plant Medicine, and anybody out there, I thank you so much for being part of our world.